Turn on. So as the voice said, this meeting is being recorded. If you have to jump off early, we can share the recording with you if you just want to email me and let me know. You all have my email because that's how you got the link tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Charlie, and good evening, and welcome to the first of 8 workshops in our Sustainable Landscape series. My name is Suzanne Barclay, and I'm the Executive Director here at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rockland. And tonight we have a local luminary as our guest speaker, Margie Turin, whom many of you know. Margie is well known in our Rockland environmental community for the numerous contributions she's made over the years. I'm guessing that if you're on the Zoom tonight, you're already aware that water conservation is of special concern in Rockland. And that's because essentially all of our drinking water supply comes from rainfall within our borders. A USGS analysis that was published in 2010 determined that our problem is that our peak water usage occurs at the worst possible time during the year. That is during the driest months in the summer, when we're all watering our lawns, our garden, washing our cars, filling pools. The good news is that this water conservation is one of the few environmental problems where we can each take individual actions and make a real and measurable difference. It's hard to say that about a lot of environmental issues like plastic pollution, but water conservation is not difficult, it's not particularly painful, and hence our focus is on outdoor water use in this series. So all of our workshops are designed to give you specific steps to help you reduce water use in your yard. Upcoming workshops will address climate and plant selection by Dr. Nina Bassick. You may know her, she's from Cornell. The next one in June will be lawn and turf management for those of you who love grass. That's being presented by Frank Rossi, also of Cornell. And then in July, Master Gardener Donna D'Souza will present on soils and water conservation, and we'll alert you to all of these workshops. I just have a few housekeeping issues Charlie had mentioned before. Because we're a large group tonight, you're all muted, but feel free to ask questions by typing them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. If you have any feedback for us or questions for us at Cornell, please email us at rockland@cornell.edu. And finally, I want to thank our funders, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the Hudson River Estuary Program, and the New York State Water Resources Institute. I also want to thank our communications manager, Charlie Payne, who you heard earlier, because he's the person who actually makes all of this happen. Margie Turin is an education coordinator for kindergarten through college at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. So you probably know Lamont Doherty is part of Columbia University, and the campus in Palisades is a place where a lot of the research and study of natural sciences occurs. When Margie's not crisscrossing the country giving talks or in Antarctica, you can find her working with students along the shore of the Hudson River. As the chair of the Conservation Committee for the county's Water Task Force, Margie will be presenting the county's water conservation plan and why it's important for each of us to pay attention to. So Margie, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you. You're muted.
That won't go very well, will it? Could be a short talk. So thank you very much. And also thank you just for thinking about including this as a topic. I think it's one that's really important. And it's one that's been in the hearts and minds of many, many people in Rockland County for a long, long time. So as Suzanne mentioned, I'm the first in this series of speakers. And when I was looking at upcoming topics, I realized that I'm kind of the underpinning. So I'm really the little foundation down here that's perhaps the reason why all these other talks might be important or relevant for us to pay attention to. At least that's the way I like to think of myself and our talk tonight. And however, we're going to have fun. It's not going to be like just a boring concrete base. We're going to really move through, and I think we'll learn some things together about each other. So first of all, I wanted to start with thank yous. I know often we leave those to the end, but I think in the last year especially, I think I've realized that it's really important to say thank you to people and to recognize all the contributions that have happened. And I wanted to give it due time and due focus. So the work that has been done by the task force and the conservation committee is really built on a lot of work that's gone before from a lot of different people who have been thinking about water and working around the water topic for many years at this point. And I don't want to try and name people because I will miss somebody, but I did want to make sure that we recognize that this is really a big project that will grow through time, and we're all going to be part of it. The Conservation Committee members, I did list here, the fellow members of the committee, they've been invaluable. And of course, our task force chairperson, legislator Cornell, and our water task force coordinator, Patricia Drake, all of whom worked to kind of bring this and craft it and move this topic forward. And there were many, as we developed the plan, there were many people that we kind of phoned in and said, hey, can you help us with a little bit here and a little bit there? And we really appreciated having those experts on tap at the county level as well as in the private sector in our county. So many thanks to everybody that really helped us with that. Okay, so this is our agenda. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction, kind of setting the stage. Then we're going to talk about Rockland's need for sustainable water practice and resilience. Then we're going to really dig into the task force and our conservation plan for a little bit. And then we're going to talk about how does this really relate to my landscaping? Like, why are we doing all this? How does it tie back to me as a Rockland resident? And then, of course, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So let's get started with a little reflection. So I want to spend a second and just think about what is your motivator? What brought you here tonight? What motivates your behavior? What is the driver that makes you do what you do? And I think that this is a really important question because it dictates our behavior. And so our choices, everything that we do is tied up in this. And so I asked Cornell to put together this little poll so that we could learn a little bit more about each other. So I'll ask you, Suzanne, if you can share that now, and you can pick as many as you would like, so you don't have to have just one. But we really want to think for a second about what's guiding our behavior and our choices. So I'll let you guys do some picking there. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to say that oftentimes I think we get tied up in doing things because we've been doing them a certain way for a long time. It's kind of rote behavior for us. And really, if we were to step back and think about why we do what we do, we might be able to choose or reroute our behavior, and we would open up an opportunity for changing that model that we have in our minds as to how things should be. So that's really important. It's also important to think about this because we influence each other. And so knowing what motivates somebody can help us with figuring out how to approach them in terms of how to create change. So if we know that somebody is motivated by saving money, we can then approach them with what are the cost-saving benefits of sustainable water practices. Whereas if we know that they're motivated by aesthetics and what their garden looks like, we could focus more on some of the wonderful wild and native plants that are available that can really provide some color and some texture in their yard. So again, these are kind of interesting things. So how are we doing? Can we see what the responses are?
Okay, so the responses are For saving money, that's important to 41%.
Okay.
Saving the planet, that accounts for 70%.
Oh, cool. Okay.
The
70.
70, yep.
Wow. Okay.
For efficiency of time,
Mhm.
that's 39%.
Okay.
Aesthetics, 61.
Okay.
And then being a trendsetter, only important to about 16%.
16. Okay. All right. Interesting. So I love that. Thank you so much for joining me and allowing us to kind of do that together. It tells me a little bit about you. And it also, I think sometimes, again, just taking a minute to think back about what motivates our own behavior is important. It's a little bit of a breathing time to think reflectively. And I'm not going to go crazy philosophical, but again, I think that it does allow us to know how to reach other people. And I think that's important, as well as what's driving ourselves. All right. So then the next thing I wanted to do was spend a second and just think about, what does sustainability mean? Because, that term is one that we hear a lot. It can mean different things to different people. And so I thought, before we go into this as a whole discussion tonight, we should spend a minute and really define the term. So the most kind of well represented, I guess, definition that I've seen is that it's about meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So the tricky business here is, what does needs mean? So needs can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And I'm quite sure that if you had this conversation with a group of friends, you would find out that different people feel that certain things are necessary. They're part of what the expectation is. So again, this is another layer, if you want to think about it that way, in terms of really understanding why we do the things we do and what's a priority or an importance to us. And paying attention to that is really important. I wanted to pop up this a graphic, which is one that we used with a program for high school students that we just finished in the county, thinking about sustainable land use. And it really ties together these four spheres that intersect in sustainability. And I think it works well in terms of water use as well as land use. So maybe we'll take a second and kind of tease it apart a bit. So if we start with the social aspect, we can think about, social drivers are really important to a lot of people. So what do other people think of them? How are they interconnected into their social circle? Does everybody else actually have a yard that looks a certain way? Is my yard look very different? Is that something that's going to influence my behavior? Does that make me feel I need to be a certain way? All of those things build into kind of the expectations. That's all tied into the social aspect of sustainable. So trying to figure out how to come up with a consensus feel and a feeling that you can be different if you want, like to be your own driver, as long as there's some value to this. Then we could move to the economic sphere, and we could look at how it is economical to be sustainable in our water choices and water uses. So it is the least expensive thing that we can do to be conservation focused, rather than having to come up with new water supplies. So that in itself is an economic component, as well as in our own pocketbooks, in our own household economy. It is less expensive for us to be water wise and manage our water. And then, of course, our water bills will go up if we ultimately need to look for new water supplies. And that has an impact at a much wider county level in terms of being business attractive and attractive to residents. So again, there's this economic aspect. Equity, we want to make sure that whatever we're able to do, the provisions that we're able to make for water need to be accessible to everyone. So managing our water is actually equitable. It's a resource that belongs to all of us together. And then, of course, in the environmental aspect, it is a resource that's part of our wider environment, and making sure that we manage, protect, and keep it available for the future is really an important thing. So all of those tie together nicely. And I think that framing of all the different spheres is an important one to keep in mind as we think about sustainable water use. Okay, so we're going to kind of move into the next part, which is Rockland's need for sustainable water practices and resilience. And so I'm going to take advantage of some work that was done by Paul Heisig. I am using his graphics in the next little bit, and I appreciate that this was all prepared and done by somebody who has spent a lot of time thinking about it and focusing on it. The work was done in 2005. It was updated for a talk in 2010, but these are base underpinnings that are not changing. So small bits might be different, but the overarching pieces are the same. So we're going to start with the fact that we have 4 main watershed drainages in Rockland County. So the Hudson River drainage is along the edge, and that is definitely not part of our drinking water. This is a brackish part of the Hudson River, as well as the fact that in essence, it's a receiver for us for a lot of our stormwater and our treated sewage water. So instead of being something that we pull in and use, it's actually a point where we lose a lot of water. Then the next part of this is the Hackensack. I seem to have lost my cursor. There it is. The Hackensack, which is a stream that actually originates in the county and drains out. Then we have the Mawa again. This is a stream that originates in the county and flows down and joins the Ramapo down in New Jersey. And then that 4th piece is the Ramapo. And that joins down at the Passaic. So the Mawa, Ramapo, and Passaic all kind of flow together as we go further down out of our county. And I think that the point that we can all take away from this is that water is a shared resource. So we just mentioned that these watersheds are actually moving down into New Jersey. So in the south, we're passing water through to them. And on the north, we're receiving water from Orange County. So unlike, our voting boundaries or other things, as we know, water doesn't know any boundaries. And so this is a resource that needs to be managed and thought about in a much larger scale. So in that area, where is our public water supply? It comes from really 3 main buckets, and they're all pretty equally divided. There's the reservoir, so the DeForest Reservoir, and then this little teeny Letchworth Reservoir that came online more recently. There is the alluvial aquifers up here in Ramapo and Mawa Valley, and then there's the Newark Basin here. And again, all of those are pretty much contributing on an equal basis to our water supply. So I mentioned already that Paul Heisig did this study a few years back, but really not a lot has changed. And that's why we're still able to kind of work from this data. There hasn't been any new water source since then. There has been some new development and water users that have come online. But also there's been some conservation that's occurred through efficiencies in fixtures have occurred, and people have been upgrading fixtures. There's been some selective conservation measures. So there has been kind of a little bit of a gain and a loss on both sides. So we can look at this data with pretty good confidence that it's pretty much the same. And so taking a look at this, what's the big takeaway from this particular diagram? Well, it's that we have the ability to really make a difference. And I think Suzanne made that comment early on. I mean, when you look at the fact that the residential population is almost 63% of the water users, that means that we can really make a big contribution to conservation in just the choices that we make. So we're a primary target. The other users, of course, we have commercial, industrial, and then we have the second largest section, aside from the residential, is this summertime increase. And if that is an area where the sticking point is, that's the area where we really want to focus, and that's where landscaping really does come into play. So that's a big focus of the conservation plan, is how to address that kind of uptick in the summer months. And this is not just residential, this is everybody's summer increased usage. So it plays back with the commercial, industrial, everybody's increase of usage. And this is just a graphic that kind of brings that a little bit more into visibility. So you can really see that from May until October, that there's this big spike that goes on in this graph. So kind of from here over to here, you'll see that there's this very big increase, and that's in water withdrawals. So during that period of time, there's an average 25% increase in well withdrawals, right? So you're really pulling a lot more water out of the aquifers and really bringing them down to non-sustainable levels. At times that goes up to as much as 50%. So that's a huge amount of water. And again, something that is within our ability to really deal with things. Another variable that I wanted to bring to our attention and kind of let us think about tonight is the fact that, and I mentioned that we're pushing a lot of storm water and sewage water out into the Hudson and out into other drainage basins. A big piece of that is the role of impervious surfaces in Rockland's water supply. And impervious surfaces can be defined as just these non-absorptive surfaces. And, you know, they can be anything from a driveway to a roof, but mainly it's roads. But all of those pieces put together create this inability of water to actually go back into our base flow in the streams, which is what ends up in those wells for us. So it's very, very important. And so, you know, there's really not a magic number in terms of the percent impervious surface that's perfect or that's really acceptable versus non-acceptable. But the USGS has done several reports, and I put the numbers here. So a 12% impervious surface increases runoff by 7 to 8%. So if we have 12% impervious surface, that's what we're going to get an increased runoff. 17% impervious surface equals a 12.5 to 16.5% increased runoff. And just a note down here, so the Pascack Brook, which is part of the Hackensack watershed, is at that 17%. So just to kind of give you a model that's in our own community, that's, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That's a ready example. But I wanted to just step into and show you a couple of maps from Rockland County because it is kind of eye-opening. So the brown color on this map is impervious surface in 2007, and it certainly hasn't gotten any better. We aren't ripping this stuff up and opening it up for better absorption. So if anything, it's gone, you know, more impervious surface. And you can see that area that I pointed out earlier, which was this low area of our wells, that is really pretty well covered up at this point. I mean, there's a lot of impervious surface. So we are not recharging that aquifer and anywhere the ability that we could be. And I think that's really important for us to pay attention to and to just put that into percentages. I popped these numbers up a little bigger, so hopefully you can see them. This area right here is 5 to 10% impervious surface. So this, of course, is the parkland. That's Harriman Park. So very little impervious surface in that area. 11 to 15% then is this next color right here. And you can see that by the time we get to 16 to 25%, we have got a big chunk of Rockland County is in that area. And it just gets worse, up to 36 to 50% for a couple of these pockets. So these are numbers to really pay attention to. And again, this is not a continuous sea of impervious surface. It's not like one big wall of asphalt, like a big parking lot. But it can become that way if we don't pay attention. So there are things that you can do on your own property to help with offsetting that. And those are things that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And again, those will help with our conservation and holding our water locally. So just to kind of summarize the second section, which is the need for sustainable water practices and resilience, just the take-home points: residential use is about 63%. Summertime increase overall is about 18%. The drawdown on those aquifers goes up by 25%. Percent impervious in Rockland County is pretty darn high, and that's preventing our water from actually getting back into our aquifers. So thinking about that as we plan our yards, our land. And then something that I didn't bring in at all is the climate variable. And I didn't bring it in because it's such a big topic, and I could get us off into a long conversation, which we don't have time for. But it is something to pay attention to. And what predictions are telling us is that we will be getting more storms with higher duration And so that will mean more runoff, more inability for us to absorb that water, especially if we don't pay attention to that impervious surface component of our county. And so big take home here is together we can do something. So we have the ability to create change with this 63% used as residential. That is right in our pocket. We have the power to create change. So let's think about that as we step into our, sorry, my mouse is acting up and turning my screen black. Okay, so we're going to step now into the fact that because of all that concern for water, a task force was formed to look at water management resources. And Chairperson Legislator Cornell of that group. And then there are 19 members and 5 committees. And that organization, that group, task force, was the structure under which the Conservation Committee was formed. And that's where we got our marching orders, if you want to think about it that way, to do something. And so what a good starting point is to think about how we can flip the switch in our water thinking through conservation. So I was talking to Suzanne earlier, and she reminded me of Al Appleton, who was one of the people that we worked with a few years back. And he kept talking about there are different ways of thinking about this. We can think about new water supply, or we can think about reducing demand. And the Conservation Committee was all about changing the way that this structure exists. So right now we have demand kind of overshadowing supply, right? So the supply is being diminished because we have such a heavy emphasis on demand. And through conservation, we can really switch that around and replenish the supply by reducing our demand. And hence our marching orders in terms of putting together this conservation plan. And this is an equitable and sustainable approach. So with that, we'll jump into the conservation plan itself. So this committee was focused on developing a comprehensive water conservation plan. And it was really interested in thinking about things that would be implementable and cost effective at many, many levels. So at the county level, at the town level, at the individual level, everybody's a player in this plan. We wanted to complement other conservation efforts that were in place. Suez has their own plan, and we wanted to not be redundant with what was going on there, but actually to complement and fill in the holes, do things that they were not able to do, and let them do the things that they had the capacity to do. And it, again, was a plan that was equitable in access, supporting the region's economic, environmental, and social well-being. So back to those spheres in sustainability, that was the overarching goal of this particular plan. So to step back, we really wanted it to be county-wide. And we are not all Suez customers. There are pieces of the county that are actually under NIAC water. There are pieces of the county that are under Suffern water. There are some smaller private providers, as well as about 6,000 residential private wells. So there are many, many people at play and different systems at play here. And we didn't want it to not be comprehensive in how it was addressing things, because it's all the same water. So no matter who the service provider is, it's all coming from the same water source. So we really needed a plan that would think comprehensively and be accessible and available to everyone. And that's not as easy as it sounds, because a lot of that data is not readily available. So this in itself took a little bit of thinking, doing, and research. And then again, we wanted to have as many implementation partners as possible. So excuse me, everything from municipalities to government agencies to businesses, hospitals, schools, and then again, you and me, like the members of the public. Everybody's a stakeholder. Everybody's part of this much larger project, and we all need to participate in it to make it work well. So the very first thing that we did was we hired Jacobs Civil Consultants Incorporated to work with us in developing the plan. And some of the slides that I'm going to show, you'll see their logo on. Those are ones that I borrowed from Kara. So I just wanted to make sure to give her credit for that. They have a lot of experience and came in with a direction and a guide, which we worked with. We added our own flavor. Certainly Rockland County is different than anywhere else. And so it would have to suit Rockland County, but they had a nice framework that we could work with. And the tests that we provided to Jacobs were that they needed to understand the current water demand in the county. And then they need to be able to do predictions. So predictions in terms of growth, in terms of water needs at two different levels. So at 2030 as well as 2050. And then they needed to identify a clear path for how we were going to get there. So what's the county's role in all of this? Who's going to be the coordinator for all of this? And so the county was going to take the lead in terms of coordinating and being a leader in the water conservation movement, but everybody's a stakeholder. And that allows for individual adoption, individually adapting a plan so that it would fit well in a specific community. You can't take something off the shelf and apply it across the board to every group, every community. Everybody needs to have the ability to have their own individual approach to it. And I think that's really critical. And then, excuse me, we wanted to be able to capture the opportunities. So to know what the expenditures were, but also what's the cost saving. So in terms of the water saving as well as the cost saving for us. And I'm not going to spend any time on this except to show you that as an engineering firm, they're very organized and they developed this wonderful approach to tests and how it would play out. But the big takeaway here is that there were stakeholder workshops in several places, as well as opportunities for stakeholder input. And the stakeholders were us, you, me, everybody on this call, and the wider community. Were asked to participate through a variety of outreach efforts to really make sure that this was crafted in a way that was reflective of what our own needs were. So again, just to kind of hit on the fact that they had to dig deep into existing literature to kind of put together the background. So they pulled from the comprehensive plan, they pulled from the USGS report that Paul Heisig did. They pulled from other reports that have been done by Amy Vickers and others in the county, as well as the county staff. They worked very closely with them to pull this information together. And then they put all of this data into a tool that's called the Alliance for Water Efficiency Tracking Tool. And that tool is now loaded so that we can track our water usage as we move forward, which took a lot of time, but it is a wonderful way of actually tracking how we're doing. Otherwise, we don't have access to a lot of that data. So it's an important component. I wanted to tell you that there were some assumptions that went into the effort to do this. So the assumptions were that there were those three sources of Rockland water were going to remain. So we would still have those three pockets, the two well fields as well as Lake DeForest, that our overall county production would be at approximately 49 million gallons a day. From Suez, we got their available water would be 34.5 million gallons a day. So there was that, the rest would be what's available for other users. They wanted to look at different usage trends, and they looked at 4 different usage trends around the country to look at different approaches to with no conservation, with extreme conservation, and different levels of conservation to just kind of look at trends. They looked at population growth and forecast a 24% population growth by 2050, which seems like a lot to me. But I mean, I'm sure that it's not unrealistic, but if you think about adding another quarter of our population, it's a lot of people. And certainly it's something to pay attention to when we're thinking about resources. And then they wanted to look at the various categories of users and the different conservation scenarios. And I wanted to focus just a minute on these stakeholder workshops because that's us. That's where we had input into the process, and we had the ability to really control our choices. And I think that the importance of our voice in the process can't be understated. And I think uh, just the same way, our behavior in terms of implementation is going to be absolutely critical. So a plan is a plan. It's not going to be anything but a plan unless it's implemented with the right approach and with all of us participating. So really paying attention to our role in things is so important. So the structure of this plan was that we wanted to have both near-term and long-term actions to save water. We need to start now, but we're going to need to change behavior for the long term. We wanted to have a balance of incentives and measures like monetary and non-monetary measures. Um, we wanted to have it so they would build on each other, so that benefits from one conservation measure would play into benefits from another, so that it was kind of leveraging it, that we could quantify our long-term water savings. Again, that it would be implementable by many, many groups. So at the local level, in a municipality, at the county level, and even at the state level. So some of the things were things where we would be lobbying the state to help move this forward, because there are different abilities at different levels. And then we also wanted to include both indoor and outdoor usage. So there is a plan. It was approved. First, it was approved by the full task force, and then it was approved early in March in 2020 by the county legislator. And of course, it's also been accepted and ratified by our county executive. And the timing on this was to me, so unfortunate, because this was, of course, right when COVID was coming to the forefront. And really, everybody was preoccupied and focused elsewhere, as they should have been. And so it feels as if we had the opportunity to launch and we got delayed. But I think we have to look at that as just a new opportunity. So it's not as if we can't do what we were planning to do. We just have to change our timing on that a little bit. And again, just to kind of think about this, it's a framework, it's a plan, but it isn't the answer. And I think that sometimes it's easy to think about the penultimate of what should be, but really it's all about, let's get started, let's make some progress, and then we can always add to this and we can refine it. And actually there's an intent in here that it would be annually reviewed, and then there'd be an update every 5 years, which makes perfect sense. And I think that that will allow us to make it dynamic, to adapt it as we go, see what's successful and build on those things, see what's not successful and perhaps step away from those, or maybe they'll be successful in another community. It's all about how we build it out and change it as we move forward. So the guts of the plan is 20 water conservation measures. And the first 6 are they're called information, but basically it's about education, providing background, about really helping to bring everybody in the county up to the same level that you are at, because I know that you're here, so you're probably already thinking about this, but everybody's not. And so it's up to all of us to begin to spread the word, as well as using some of these tools. So that's the first piece. The second set of measures, which are 9 different measures, were about incentives. So ways that we can help sweeten the pot, if you want to think about it that way, to really bring about change in different groups in different communities. So with our business group, or with our plumbing group, or our landscapers, what are some of the things that we can do? And then the third batch, there are 5 of them, and these were more about regulations. So what are some bits of legislation or pieces that we could put in place to really move us forward when we get to where everybody knows things, and now we need to really start to create change more seriously. And one of the things that was an important part of all this was that they thread. So there is a landscape education, a sustainable landscape education program in the information section, there is a landscaper, irrigation, and plant nursery partnership that threads across in the incentives. And then there is a lawn and landscape irrigation schedule that falls into the regulations. And that is by intent. So the goal of this is to kind of move things so that they build on each other, and they reinforce each other, and they layer together. So this will be a really important part of actually making it successful, not just between you and me, but then taking it to the landscapers and then taking it on to the broader community. And the landscape one is the one we're going to focus on tonight. And that one is really the one that focuses in heavily on this peak demand period, because landscaping is a huge use during these summer months. I mean, this is a big driver of this big bump in our water use. So really focusing in on what are some things that we can do to create the change that we need. So I'll take just a second to kind of walk you through what's in each one of these, just to kind of show you how it actually unfolds, because they are layered, and that's a benefit or a bonus. So the first thing is, what's the intent of this particular measure itself? So, you know, who is it focused on? What are we trying to do here? And then points of integration is, how does it connect or thread through to other measures that are in our 20, in our suite of options? And then who are the implementation partners? So who are the people that we can rely on to help us move this forward? And then who are the additional stakeholders that we could bring in? Because once you bring in additional stakeholders, you widen your group of influence, number one, and it helps to create that groundswell of change that's important. Then there's the write-up that explains the conservation measure. So what is it and how do we expect it to work? The implementation. So this is how it's been implemented in other places successfully. So here's a model. Let's try that out. The potential cost of doing this, the potential water savings that will come from this. And not in every instance is that possible, but looking at other communities that have done it, and then looking at our where we are in the Northeast and all of those pieces, you can come back to some of that. And then some additional ways of enhancing this implementation, so things that you can do over and above, and then additional resources that are available. So all of that is how just one of those 20 measures is laid out. And again, it's a distributed approach. So we're focusing on different audiences, different stakeholders, and different groups. Also looking at different timeframes. So some of these had a 1 to 3 year rollout, others 3 to 5 years, some roll them out after 5 years. So this plan would build on itself with different timeframes, again, with water savings from both 2030 and 2050. So you can see this kind of building arc. And I just wanted to show you that, you know, it's the idea is you put the foundation together, and then in year 2, you continue to build on it, and then you expand it to a new audience or to a new community. And then ultimately, year 5, you're really into a well-developed program that hopefully is self-sustaining at that point. Okay, so in the end, this plan is one that's comprehensive. It establishes kind of a clear path for us to move forward. It is implementable and cost effective. It complements these other resource conservation efforts. It is sustainable in terms of being equitable and dealing with the environment, the social, and the economy. And it's adaptable, so it can be used through different places in the county as well as into the future. So that's the plan. Now let's kind of think about, how does this really relate to my landscaping? So just to kind of look across this line, here is the sustainable landscape. This is the education information in that first column. So it's going to be implemented locally. It is going to be something that is ongoing. So it's at every single time step, we're going to need to be doing this, which is true for almost all of the education measures that we have in place. It applies to all these different users. So every single user group there is, single family, multifamily, commercial, and industrial. And really we're focused on the outdoors. So we aren't focused at all on the indoors in this particular measure. So again, there's this kind of balance. And the goal of this particular task is that we're going to focus on water saving landscape practices, and that's going to include minimizing pavers and paved areas. We're going to think about cost savings in our landscaping. We're going to think about our environmental health. We're going to think about wildlife, which are the best plants that are adapted to our county that are easily available, and also about how we can influence that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. And then if in fact irrigation is needed, we're hoping that irrigation would not be needed for a lot of the landscape programs and plans that we're considering. But if it's needed, I'm using best practices for irrigation efficiency. And that can include drip systems or rain sensors, timers, irrigation systems on stations so that you're not watering everything exactly the same, that different areas can be used differently. So rolling out all these different pieces. And so I thought we'd just kind of look at a couple of examples of what might be part of this. So what does this look like in practice? So up here in the top, we have a native plant garden. So thinking about the plants that we use, what are the plants that make sense in our community? Does it really make sense to bring in, a tree that is not from this area that requires a considerable amount of water, that's going to have pest issues, that's going to really require an ongoing maintenance? No. Does it really make sense to bring in plants that are going to require a tremendous amount of fertilizer or pesticide, water? Again, thinking about what makes sense here and using that in your garden. That would be what's pictured up here in the top left. Over here in the top right, we're moving away from a paved pathway. So in this particular situation, we have a mulch down so you can walk through this native plant area, and a couple of little flagstones to support a walk if you wanted to include them. You don't really even need to include them. But again, it's a much more natural look. It fits nicely with the landscape, and it's also water sensitive. On the bottom, we have a swale. So this, it's maybe a little hard to see, but this particular pathway is actually tipped from the high on the right to the lower on the left. And the idea here is that you're working with the ground the way that the ground existed. So you're not trying to level everything and then water pools or doesn't absorb. You're capturing the water in the plants and allowing it to run down and collect in this lower side of the garden. And as you plant it, of course, you would put plants down in this lower section that are going to want that additional water. So think about it in terms of the same way that you would put in a rain garden. And then over here on the bottom right, we're looking at leaving kind of a mature trees in place in the background in your yard rather than removing trees. Let's leave those in place. Let's kind of make it more of a forested look and have this additional shrubberies here. And then if you needed to have a minimal lawn, just kind of minimizing that lawn, but trying to leave these mature plants in place. So that's how those things go into practice. And we'll move next into the incentives. So the incentive one that ties to this landscape piece is one where we're trying to build partnerships between landscapers, irrigators, and plant nurseries so that we can educate as a group. We can provide a ready audience for our native plants. We can train our landscapers to work with irrigation in a more natural, more sustainable way. So all those pieces work together. And this again would be something that would be implemented at a local level. And this would also play out across all the timeframes that we're talking about. And in terms of what sector it would apply to, again, it applies to all the different sectors and outdoor use. And so in this particular situation, we're looking to address, again, this outdoor peak usage, which is a problem for us. And the goal is to really get all groups to support the idea of water conservation. So everybody's a partner in this project. So meeting with local businesses to encourage them to be part of this. Developing, one idea is to develop a county certified landscape audit program, which would be kind of a different approach, something new and different, but again, an incentive. So if you had one of these certifications, then you can display it. Encouraging sustainable plants, and then promoting water sense programs for irrigation professionals. And we'll talk about water sense in just a minute, because that is a key part of our partnership and our tools that are available to us. So here are some examples of how does this play into practice. So this is a sign from a Long Island nursery that sells natives. They exclusively promote native plants. What a wonderful idea, but it doesn't have to be the entire nursery. Maybe we just encourage our nurseries to set up sections where they have all native plants if we can't get the full native plant nursery going. Again, word of mouth, we as consumers have a lot of power in terms of what actually happens. And landscapers, I've been at many meetings where landscapers will say the same thing. They'll say that they do what they do because the homeowners want it. So we as homeowners and we as residents from Rockland have the ability to really create this change. We just need to know where our power is and then use our power. So be vocal when we shop and go armed with native plant lists when we go somewhere. Know what we want and know what is a native plant and how it will work. And we can work with landscape architects. There are several in Rockland County who work with native plant design. So again, kind of thinking about it that way. And then the EPA has developed this program called Water Sense, of which the county is a Water Sense partner. Many of our municipalities are Water Sense partners. That was something that we did early on the Conservation Committee, was went to these different communities and asked them to join in as Water Sense partners. And so as Water Sense partners, there's a lot of wonderful material that's available, promotional material, pieces that we can use to reach out into the community and share these via email, door to door, word of mouth, however we want to share that out. But these are 3 different pieces that talk about different aspects of water conservation. So thinking about, what you're doing with watering and how, as much as 50% of this is wasted outdoors. So then on the flip side of this, there are some really important conservation tools, things that you can do in spring. So what do we do? And again, connecting this back with our irrigation people so that they are partners with us in inspecting the system and directing things and connecting. If we don't do it ourselves, which many of us don't, let's make sure that we're using a partner that does this and knows how to do this. And then just this whole save water in the summer. So a whole battery of different tips as to what you can do in your own property. So that's how this particular piece gets put into practice. And then the last section is these regulations. And this comes back to managing how much we actually irrigate our yards. So many places that we looked when we were doing our original investigative work, we found that 1 time a week watering, 2 time a week watering, that's the max. And that's actually incredibly efficient at cutting our water use, and it actually makes for healthier lawns and healthier yards. So it's a win-win-win, win all the way around. And so trying to figure out how to actually promote that and bring that into practice is the goal of this particular measure. And so again, this is a local piece. It's something that probably would roll out partway into our adoption of the conservation plan. So maybe not the first thing out the gate. And it plays across all different groups, again, single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. And again, we're focused on the outdoors. And just what are some of the pieces of this? So it would be to reduce water usage year round. considering limiting to time of day as well as days of week. So it's not even just about how many days, it's that you don't water in the middle of the day. And I assume most of you know that, that you don't irrigate in the rain, which happens more often than we'd care to think. We minimize the runoff that goes on. And then there is a built-in exemption for new planting because we recognize that that's an important thing. You certainly don't want to invest in landscaping and have it lost. I mean, that's even a bigger non-sustainable component. So we want to make these adaptable, useful, and dynamic, as I've mentioned already. And so what does this look like in practice? So interestingly, I pulled these two pieces off of a water group for Connecticut and Massachusetts that has this already in play. So they have this weekly sprinkler irrigation schedule already being used effectively. And they have this entire section of their website that's devoted to landscapes can thrive on twice weekly water or even less. So trying to help to change the culture. And again, that goes back to what's our motivation, what brings us here today, and how do we actually create that change in behavior that we want to change. And then this bottom picture down here is just an image of really managing through, if you have a sprinkler system, have it set up on a control so that it can do everything from reading, the dryness of the soil or the wetness of the soil. So is there a need to water? Evapotranspiration rates, as well as just making sure that it's set to be go off at a very early time of day. And with that, I'll say thank you for listening and participating, and happy to do questions if there are any.
So Margie, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. You were able to distill so much complex data and concept and make them relevant and comprehensible to us. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Very
So we
welcome.
have just a few questions for you.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone asked, are there any plans to recharge the aquifers?
I'm not sure what exactly that would mean, to be honest. So I think that there has been talk about how do we actually improve our permeability. It's not an easy task, as we've already mentioned. We've got a lot of pervious surface that already exists. There have been talk about trying to, and we're never going to do it with small rain gardens, but rain gardens are beneficial because they actually do hold on to the water. Yeah, I'm not sure how you would actually recharge an aquifer other than trying to shunt less water out and hold more of it in the county's borders. And that is a huge question that is beyond my pay grade. So I think I will leave it there. I'm so sorry. I really couldn't say any more than I have.
No, I think you touched on it though, especially when you showed the map of impervious surface in the county.
Mm-hmm.
One way is to, as you say, keep our stormwater within our borders and allow it time to be absorbed into the ground to then recharge the aquifer.
Yeah, and that, I think that it seems overwhelming when you think about it, but in fact, if you think about the fact that this large percentage of us, right, almost 68% of us are, or 63% of us are residential users, we have control of what's going on in our yards. We have the ability to allow that to work, and we can do it through carefully thinking about how we treat the land on our property and trying to divert that water to stay on the land that's there rather than hitting the streets and off into the gutters and curbs.
So another question is, someone's asking about water sense, and can somebody come and evaluate their water practice in their yard, in their garden?
So WaterSense is an EPA program that's actually at a national level. So WaterSense itself would not be doing, be doing that. They're more of a resource for communities to tie into education, information, etc. That, I mean, I'm assuming that there are, so let me stop and say that there are people that are water sense trained, and we do have a couple that actually are in the county. I know that they look at new building and how to develop new building that way. I don't know. I don't know if there's somebody on the call that I know Jan was planning to be on here. I don't know if he is online and wants to see if he could weigh in on that. Tony Lasanti is another person. So we have some very capable individuals in the county, but I honestly don't know if they go to homes to actually do an assessment. One of the things that is part of our plan is to have a self-assessment. One of the measures that is there is a self-assessment tool where we would, there are existing tools where you can do these things yourself, but depending on how complex your water usage is and what you've got going on, that could be more than an individual homeowner wants to tackle.
So just so you know, Jan Dagenshine was a participant, but he had to jump off.
Okay, no worries.
So our next question is it possible that an unintended consequence of limiting lawn irrigation to twice weekly might drive up the use of lawn chemicals?
An interesting thought. So I think that no matter what you do, you have to do it in a wise way. So you would have to educate. You can't just throw out a requirement that you can only water twice a week and sorry guys, this is it. You have to help people understand that the reason that we're doing this is to drive the roots down. Those roots will become deeper and your lawn will actually become more resilient. And the more that you put these chemicals on, it's actually not beneficial for the lawn. It actually doesn't let the lawn actually deal with its own challenges. So I would hope that it would be rolled out in a way that would be thoughtful enough that we wouldn't have that consequence, but I can't guarantee. One never knows what people will do.
Well, and just to remind people, we'll be having Frank Rossi,
yes,
who's an expert on turf and lawn management, and he'll be speaking in June on this very issue. So we'll let you know. That's actually, I'm sorry, he's May 12th. So he will be our next speaker. The next question is the Water Task Force hoping that all the municipalities in Rockland adopt this plan and implement the recommendations in their land use planning decisions?
Yes. Yes. And I think that that's one of the really important points that I was trying to make is that it's not a plan that you have to pull in one piece and it looks just the same in every community. It's not like a cookie cutter. This is a dynamic plan that would allow a community to do things differently, but it's a guide. And it's the first piece, which I didn't talk about because there are 20 pieces and, you know, we could go on for a long time, but the first piece is about designing white papers that really look at how could each individual community take pieces of this and use it to their advantage. So what works in Clarkstown might not be what works in Ramapo, and it might not be what works in Orangetown, but we would like for everyone to participate in it. And I think I tried to make the point that we're all in this together. We have one batch of water, so everybody needs to be really thinking about this as this is a shared resource.
Another question, are permeable roadways, parking lots, sidewalks affordable for our local governments and private businesses?
So can you say again, so a permeable
roadways, parking lots, are they affordable? Can our local governments and private businesses afford to put those in?
Yeah, good question. So they are not as inexpensive as putting down your traditional tarmac. That's definitely true. I guess if you wanted to think about erosion, you know, the stormwater, all of the lack of absorption, all of those pieces, and think about true cost, which is something that we don't tend to do. So we don't tend to think about all these extraneous things that we actually are paying for that are really a function of the fact that we have this impermeable surface. It might then change the look of things a bit. So you might recognize that it is actually more affordable than you think it is. But there are approaches that we can use that would allow us to do small pieces that would help us. So looking at key areas perhaps where we really could get an extra added benefit from recharging an aquifer, we might want to focus in on that particular area. Yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give.
Okay, and another point, this is a place where residents could encourage their local planning boards, their town and village planning boards, to perhaps include incentives for developers to consider permeable pavement.
Such a great point. And thank you for mentioning that, because, and it's great having a second brain on this. So Suzanne was part of our conservation committee, as you probably saw. One of our plans is to have some of those benefits during development planning, so that if you are able to include some water conservation measures in your planning, you would get some additional points or some additional benefits. So that's an incentive piece, and I think it's an important one. We recognize that everybody's not going to be altruistic. There are pieces in this that we're going to have to kind of work with.
Here's a comment. Somebody's noting that in Nebraska, there were proposals made 40 years ago to recharge the Ogallala from the Missouri in spring flood season, but it didn't go forward because it was considered too expensive.
That's interesting. So we'll have to look at that. Yeah, I mean, I think that is one piece that trying to do things in a cost-effective manner. It's hard to go backwards when we've gone a certain direction. And so we see this with dam removal. It's expensive to remove dams, but they're there and they are an obstruction. And so in certain places, it's a priority item and we can remove them. As much as, again, with asphalt removal or impervious surface removal, being able to target areas where we can recharge more passively. I mean, that sounds like an active recharge, which would be a little bit different, but probably more passively.
Someone is asking what happened to the planned desalination plant in Haverstraw.
Yeah, that was voted down, and it was the PSC decided that it wasn't the proper approach, and so that was pulled off of the table. But part of that plan did require us to think about conservation and to come up with conservation. So that is a key aspect of it. So the Water Task Force was formed as part of that to try and think about our water. We have to reduce our water use in the county. We know that we're pushing on a threshold during the summer months, as we talked about. And so conservation is something that hadn't been done in earnest. Let's start with thinking about it that way. There hadn't been a concerted effort to do conservation. And so starting with that approach was a much more cost-effective way of dealing with the water use. So that goes back to that one image that I showed you with supply and demand, where we can try and increase supply, but that's really expensive, or we can change the amount of demand on the system. And that's a much more accessible approach for us in terms of economics.
So someone asked, would there be any value to reclaiming old wells that have come into disuse, as more people have been added to municipal water supplies? And then they ask, how might I reclaim an old well?
Yeah. So, I mean, the water is all the same water, right? I mean, there is really, it's all pulling from the same base. So I'm not sure that would actually be a benefit in terms of water supply. There are 6,000 residential private wells from the data that we've been showed from Suez back a while in the county. So there are plenty of private wells out there, but again, and that's why this plan was to include them as part of our partnership, because it's all the same. It's, there's one bank of water. And yeah, I would expect I don't know the process for reactivating an old well, but you would contact the county and start to work through them on doing that.
Well, also, many people abandon wells because their wells have been contaminated.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
that's
often why they go to municipal water.
yes, you're absolutely right. And there have been many that have been contaminated with salt as well as other contaminants, toxins.
So one person asked, do the recent findings of the PFAS or PFOAs in Rockland water impact the overall plan?
No, I would say not. The PFAS or PFAOs are pretty widespread. It won't factor into conservation one way or the other. It's a separate but equal or more important challenge that we're facing right now, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. These are all important water issues, and we need to address them all at the same time, but it doesn't impact this.
So we just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Is there a way of perforating driveways or sidewalks to make them at least somewhat pervious?
Absolutely. So you can see that actually in parking lots in a lot of places where they have landscape cuts in them, where you would just put a little planter area and allow the water to direct the water into those areas, so that it will become absorptive rather than deflecting the water in other areas. It's actually a wonderful technique. And I wish we had more of it, because we certainly have plenty of, I shouldn't say plenty, but there are definitely a number of large parking areas. I mean, I just think about the Palisades Mall, and wouldn't it be great to take that parking lot and just put these planter strips in it and let some of that water go somewhere? Because as it sits right now, you have these raised curves with a couple of small trees or plants, but that's a little different. We really want something that's on flow, that's really collecting this water, and large enough that you can put some trees in so that that's pulling that water down. And that is an area that's actually a wet area of Rockland. So, it'd be kind of nice to get some plant in there.
Somebody's asking about roof rain barrels. I assume that's rain coming off a roof.
Yeah, I don't, I'm assuming, because I don't know about rain barrels on roofs, but yes, rain barrels are really wonderful, because you can put them at the end of a gutter and you can stop that, fast flush of water that ends up going out into the curb and down into the storm drain. So you can hold on to it and then redirect it out into your yard. So they're a really great investment. You guys have them, don't you, Suzanne?
Yes, so we sell them on behalf of Rockland Green, and you get a rebate if you are a Suez customer. So if you are a Suez customer, you can come in, buy a rain barrel, and I think you submit your receipt to them, or proof of purchase.
Tremendous. So there you go. Win-win. I love it.
Then someone asked, are there any incentive or is there any assistance to encourage residential rain gardens, like maybe discounts for materials or plants, or assistance for rain garden design? So I could answer that, because
great, please do.
Master gardener volunteer Chris Schenker, who is a landscape designer. She'll be presenting a program in September or October. I don't think we've nailed the date down yet, but specifically on designing a residential rain garden. So look for that workshop. She's excellent, both at design and presenting. So you'll want to check that out.
That is amazing. Yeah. So rain gardens can be such a really neat asset. So I'm glad you're doing that. Great.
And then I think the last question is there a plan to use gray water? And is there a way to use retention ponds for watering grass and landscape?
So gray water is something that's actually managed beyond us. So that's a state issue. And that I assume will take some time. Am I right, Suzanne? Or you have a funny look on your face? Am I
Oh, no,
missing? Okay. I thought maybe I had misspoken. But last I knew, it was actually not something that had gotten approval yet, you know, beyond. So it's nothing that we can take advantage of right now. And what was the rest of that question? Detention basins?
Yeah, could you use a retention basin for watering the landscape?
So this is a detention basin that somebody else has set out, or I guess I'm trying to figure out how that would actually work.
Well,
don't-
so in some residential developments,
Mhm.
one way that the architect or landscape architect will deal with stormwater management for the whole development is
Mhm.
to direct it all to a common retention or detention
Right,
basin. So I think
right.
maybe that's what he's talking about.
Okay, right. So that's not something that's directly, so I guess it would depend whether there was a homeowners association or some association that managed that, because I really don't know the details on it. Um, usually in a detention basin, you probably have to pump that water out because it's going to be, it's just rainwater, right? It's just rainwater that's run in there. So it seems as if it could be used. It's just that I don't know the ownership aspect of it in this particular situation. And you would have to, I assume, pump it out because it's going to be lower than grade to be able to grab and hold that water. So,
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, though, again, for land use boards, is to ask them to encourage developers to possibly think about that, a detention basin as a potential source of watering the landscape. Often they, you know, the water isn't retained very long. It's absorbed pretty quickly.
yeah.
Um, but it's something, you know, maybe we could consider, land use boards could consider.
Yeah. And I mean, most of them have an outflow, so they're also moving the water out. They're designed to hold it and slow it as it goes out. So,
Right.
yeah.
And finally, is the town of Orangetown a water sense partner?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
then finally, Margie, people were really liking the native plants you showed.
Yes, thank you. So I meant to put a credit on those. So thank you so that I can get the credit on audio. I got those pictures from the Westchester College Native Plant Society. So they have, I pulled the different years. Every year they have one woody plant and then one perennial that they kind of showcase. And I wanted to make the talk a little bit more fun, because it can be a lot of data. So thanks. I'm glad somebody appreciated that. They made me smile too.
Yeah. And sorry, one last question again about industrial detention basins. I think it's the same answer as the smaller residential basins. I think it depends on how they were designed as to whether they actually retain water for very long or whether it's quickly absorbed into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, some of them have like a cement base, and so they're really with the pipe out, and they're really just designed to hold and just kind of provide like a hose rather than having a huge deluge of water out. But some are actually left more natural, and they've been doing more natural more recently. I think older ones, like I can remember ones that were put in many years back that were like these big cement, like funnels almost, that just were designed to hold and then release slowly. So I think it would just depend on how they were structured.
Well, I think that's it for questions, Margie. So again, thank you so much for your very comprehensive and interesting presentation.
Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Suzanne, for hosting. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And now please watch for our announcements for future talks. We hope you'll be joining us in the future because as we mentioned before, we're all in this to try to conserve our water supply. So thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you.